Now, before we dive into this week's episode, I want to give a special shout out to our sponsor, 4Air. 4Air is leading the way with the industry's first framework to address aviation's climate impact, offering clear, verifiable pathways to reduce and counteract aircraft emissions. Their new Assure SAF registry is making it easier than ever to manage and claim sustainable aviation fuel usage across the value chain. Want to learn more? Check out the show notes.
I like to think of it as very much a John F. Kennedy moment. If you remember when he challenged the nation to land a man on the moon, this was a time when much of that technology literally did not exist. But by articulating a vision that bold and that inspiring, it galvanized our nation into action. So for us, this was this idea that we're going to decarbonize this airline fully 10 years ahead of what most others are saying, but it's going to take things that don't exist. And therefore, we created Alaska Star Ventures. It's been almost 4 years now to accelerate that path.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simply Flying. Every Thursday, I have important conversations with top aviation executives, technology entrepreneurs, and policymakers helping aviation take climate action. Conversations that help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you are a frequent flyer or an airline executive, if you care about sustainability or simply love traveling, welcome aboard. My guest today is Pasha Saleh. Pasha is the head of corporate development at Alaska Airlines. He specifically manages Alaska Star Ventures, which is the venture capital arm of Alaska Airlines. He's personally led major investments in sustainable aviation startups from Jet Zero, the blended wing aircraft manufacturer, to 12, the eSAF producer. Pasha and I discuss in depth what it takes to make aviation sustainable, why and how Alaska Airlines is set to achieve its 2040 target of getting to net zero. What's interesting is Pasha is also a pilot who was flying actively 737s up until recently with over 25 years of experience in sales and marketing, operations, and all sorts of aspects of the airline business. This was a fantastic conversation, and I hope you enjoy listening to Pasha's insights. Pasha, it is fantastic speaking and having you on the show. Tell us about Alaska Airlines Ventures. What do you do?
Yes, well, great to be here. Thank you for having me, and super exciting that we have a venture arm to discuss. So Alaska Star Ventures is the name of the enterprise. It's actually called that because Alaska Star Airlines is the official first name of our airline back into the 30s. Yeah. You'll see the AS on a lot of our registration numbers for Alaska Star. So really, why did we start an investment arm? As you know, some airlines have them, not a lot do. It really goes back to our history. Alaska Airlines, when you're thinking of technology, it's always led the way. Whether it was the fact that we were the first airline in the world to sell a ticket on the internet, or even to use a GPS to guide our airplanes back before really most of the world had even heard the term GPS, we were doing that. Great story there. So it really stands to reason that in the face of a challenge that's as profound as decarbonizing aviation, we would once again want to step up in this way. So we established these very ambitious climate goals, as you know, and immediately it was apparent that to achieve them, it would take technology capability that really doesn't exist in the world today. And to the extent that it does exist, most of this technology is operating subscale, even laboratory scale. I like to think of it as very much a John F. Kennedy moment. If you remember when he challenged the nation to land a man on the moon, this was a time when much of that technology literally did not exist. 1962, right? Things like life support technology, pressure suits, even the computational power you needed to get there. It just didn't exist. But by articulating a vision that bold and that inspiring, it galvanized our nation into action. And it gave rise to these innovations that it weren't just specific to that objective that he outlined, but it ended up benefiting humanity in ways that we couldn't have foreseen. So for us, this was this idea that we have this bold vision. We're going to decarbonize this airline fully 10 years ahead of what most others are saying, but it's going to take things that don't exist. And therefore, we created Alaska Star Ventures. It's been almost 4 years now to accelerate that path. Instead of think of it as rather than passively waiting for things to happen, then jumping on when they do. It's let's bring about that change.
Wow, I love it.
Yeah,
this is brilliant. I love the background. I had no idea that firstly it was Alaska Star Airlines. Secondly, that you were the first airline to have a digital booking. With digital booking,
that's right.
Did you say? Wow,
first ticket sold on the internet.
I had no idea of this. I definitely know the last one and the laggards there. What's interesting to me about Alaska Star Ventures is the focus on sustainability. Now, we know airlines that have corporate venture arms like Hangar 51 at IAG or JetBlue Ventures in the US. I don't believe any of them are sustainability led. It is part of it, but it is not the core focus. Is that different about Alaska Star Ventures? Is sustainability the focus for your investments?
So yes, it's the primary focus. In fact, when we first launched it with approval of our board of directors, it was 100% sustainability focused. That was the mandate for inception, that we would find this technology. And something else to mention is, the focus on sustainability, as important as it is and exciting as it is, it's going to give rise to whole new industries that don't exist yet today. I often think, imagine if the airlines had equity stakes in the oil companies back when they first started flying, how different the financial picture would have looked for this industry. So what will be the industries that arise from sustainability? And so that was also a part of it. There will be some compelling business opportunities as we retool our entire way of doing business. But now as we've evolved, we've also, through our market scanning and our diligence, we're seeing other exciting opportunities that aren't necessarily 100% sustainability per se, but are good for business, operational efficiency, just doing things safer and better. And so we're looking at those areas. But I would say that the primary focus will remain on sustainability technology.
What is the size of the fund? Is there a fund that you are running? Is there a complete size or it's not?
So it's off the balance sheet. We haven't publicly disclosed numbers, but it's not that we're trying to deploy a set amount of capital. Having said that, we're now approaching $90 million that we've deployed over 4 years. So
wow, that is absolutely amazing. Now, your first investment was a $15 million in Up Ventures, Up Partners inaugural fund. How's that partnership evolved, and why Up Partners as the first investment?
Yes, yeah, you've done your homework. That was our first investment. So Up Partners is a really interesting group. They were actually founded by two of my closest personal friends, longtime friends, Ben Marcus and Cyrus Sigari, and they joined forces with one of the smartest, highest integrity people I've ever met, a gentleman named Adam Grosser. And interestingly, all three of them are pilots through and through. So these guys are deeply steeped in the history of aviation. And why that's important is that it gives them a very realistic and grounded perspective on what it will actually take to transform an industry like this. And by that, I mean an industry that has to be bulletproof from a safety perspective. We can't be getting so excited about ideas that we lose focus of what we're, the core value of aviation. And so what made it right for us was not just that they had this subject matter expertise and obviously highly competent individual, but it was this foundation of trust that I had in the individuals over a long time, really knowing who is it that I'm going to be taking this airline? This airline's been around almost 100 years, and they've trusted me enough to do something completely different. But who is going to lead us on this journey? So for that, there's no substitute. There's no shortcut to having known people and knowing what they stand for. And so now we invested in their fund nearly 4 years ago. And it's evolved. The business relationship has matured. We're now working with one of their affiliated groups called Up Labs, which we can talk about, which we will launch 6 new startups together. So it's a really deepened relationship. And of course, there's the Up Summit, which you're aware of. It really has to be seen to be experienced. I think they describe it as Burning Man meets Davos meets TED meets Oshkosh Air Show, and that's probably the best description I could come up with.
Very, very interesting. I'm definitely curious. How does Up Labs work? You just alluded to that.
Yes, so Up Labs is a venture studio. The idea is here we are investing. We began it's sort of a crawl, walk, run approach. We knew that we needed to bring about new technology. We know that we're not, airlines don't employ investment bankers typically. And so how do we learn about investing? And through investing in established funds, I should point out we also invested in a fund called the Wesley Group, who are a fantastic climate focused fund with deep experience. That taught us enough about how to be investors, how to diligence a deal, how to ask the right questions, and then that progressed us to the next stage of making direct investments into startups, and then the evolution of that is, well, what if we need something for which there is no startup? It just doesn't exist. There's nobody we can go invest in, and it's something that's too hard for us to build internally. This is where Up Labs comes in. What they do is they have a very interesting model. They go to some of the world's biggest corporations. They're working with us. They're working with Porsche. They've got other large corporate partners. And they say, what are some of your biggest, hardest, thorniest problems, things you just cannot take on internally? And then if there is no startup in the world that's addressing it, let's go build one together. What's nice about this is all of the incentives are aligned. It's very unique that way. The corporate partner is bringing the problem set. And if you think about it, a key reason many startups fail is lack of this product market fit. It's an idea that the startup founders get excited about, but at the end of the day, people might not be willing to pay for it. This turns out on its head. It's saying, here's a problem we wish there was a solution for. Let's go build it. But we don't know how to build a startup. You guys do. And so we take a 25% equity stake in the startup. And then they go and hire the talent. And the talent is all serial entrepreneurs who've done this before. And so it's a really very, very new model. And with them, we're going to build 6 new companies. The first one actually was launched just a couple of months ago.
Was that first one? Do we know about it?
Yes, we announced it at World Aviation Festival in Amsterdam. It's called Odyssey. And so to be clear, all of these startups will be software companies. We're not going to build hardware or a new type of airplane or anything like that. They're software companies. And this one is an AI-powered flight scheduling optimization system.
Okay, that can definitely do with some AI in there.
And believe it or not, it has a huge sustainability component that might not be obvious.
I can imagine. Now, you mentioned you won't be investing in hardware startups building new planes, but you just invested in JetZero.
Yes.
The blended wing provider. It's as hardware as it gets.
Yes.
Why JetZero? Why do you think blended wing aircraft carrying an Eskimo on its tail makes sense?
Yes. And a Pualani, don't forget the Hawaiian brand.
Yeah.
So yes, we did invest in JetZero. I'm personally, as a pilot, super excited about that particular investment. Why JetZero? So at first glance, of course, you look at it and you think this is so futuristic. It's wildly different than the way any airplane we've seen before. But if you squint your eyes and you really look carefully, it's in fact not that different than we might expect. It's based entirely on principles that have been studied for a very long time, I mean, decades. And interestingly, the technology to build it is all off the shelf available today. It's narrow body engines on a wide body size platform. It's composite structures that we learned all about with the Dreamliner, about how to form shapes of that complexity. It's about flight control systems that we know how they work. So it's not relying on, I need a fuel that doesn't exist yet, or I need, it's just never been arranged in that way before. And once you do, you get a radical step change, up to 50% more fuel reduction. And as you know, this is a world when a 1% efficiency gain we get excited about as airlines. 50%, it sounds too good to be true, but the math bears it out.
Wow. I cannot imagine, now that Alaska has announced flying to Tokyo and Seoul, where you might actually fly with this JetZero aircraft.
Well, maybe each of those places. I mean, it's a long range airplane with wide body capability. So, just super exciting.
I would love for you to talk us through how you evaluate which technologies to invest in. What's your investment criteria like?
Yes. So as I mentioned, our primary focus is to enable our path to net zero. So not surprisingly, we began with our 5-part path to net zero, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's not that different than other airlines.
I've actually had Diana on the show before, so Diana
Great.
Racco has run us through in detail about this.
Exactly. So that is sort of the framework for the high level vetting of what we want to look in. We would like to find investments, ideally, to map against each of those buckets of novel propulsion and SAF and airframe efficiency and operational efficiency and those sorts of things. So that's the high level. The next is, where can we make a meaningful difference? So for us, because if you look at that continuum of strategic investor to financial, we're more on the strategic side. Obviously, we don't want to lose any money doing this, and we'd love to make money, but that's not the primary motivation. It's really to be connected to this technology, and a step beyond that is to influence this technology, make sure it turns out the way we want it to turn out. And so when you kind of put those criteria, map it to our 5-part path, make sure we can have some influence over it, you start to really look at seed stage and Series A is where we're ideally drawn to, where for a given amount of check size and equity, we can still, have a seat at the table, as it were, to informing the evolution of what we invest in.
So let's go back to two of the investments we've spoken about. There's Jet Zero, and then there's Odyssey.
Yes.
How do you getting involved in Jet Zero at this stage and Odyssey help you create a product that's well suited to Alaska Airlines itself?
Yes, so let's start with Jet Zero. We're the first airline investor in Jet Zero, and we help them convene an airline customer advisory board, you could call it. And so we want to make sure, Jet Zero has an unbelievable team. I mean, it's really star-studded cast of people. You couldn't handpick better engineers and scientists and people putting this airplane together. But as we've learned over and over in aviation, if you're not close to your end customer, you can start to develop things that may be out of touch. And, I don't mean from a safety perspective, but the market may not really want it. It's exciting. It's interesting that if you get a lot of engineers and scientists excited about an idea, of course, they're going to pursue that idea, in the scientific sense, but you have to have that link to commercial. What will an airline pay for? What are the pain points to operating your product? Will it fit in with the existing, network and systems that airlines have? So we're bringing a voice to that, and we've convened a few meetings already. And the first one I was the representative at, and quickly it became clear that we need subject matter experts throughout our airlines. So for the last meeting, which occurred just last month, we had people from our flight operations engineering group coming down and giving insight into LOPAs and ground serviceability of the aircraft. And all of this, in theory,
such important
result
insight.
don't put the loading door here, put it here. Think about this, those sorts of things that you only know if you've operated airplanes for 100 years.
Wow, that's amazing. And what about Odyssey? I mean, you mentioned it's a AI scheduling software. Does it have a sustainability impact? How do you get involved there?
Yes. So, the thing about sustainability, which, of course, you realize is that it's such a broad and all-encompassing topic that just about everything has a meaningful sustainability component to it. So while Odyssey, isn't a biofuel or something direct that you could see as a one-for-one substitute for something that's not sustainable today, what it's doing is it's optimizing where we fly and when we fly. And so you might be surprised to know that our flight schedule is revised about 110,000 times a year. I mean, it's just a shocking amount of interventions. And all of these are manual interventions where an analyst goes in, moves a flight earlier, later by a few minutes, swaps a morning departure from one city to another, things like that. And while all of these moves are made with the best of intentions and after a lot of deliberation, it's just simply impossible for a human being to quantify all the knock-on effects of any change. Things like, is this going to make or break downline connections? Will these changes increase or decrease the resiliency? And if it's not good, then you're going to have sustainability effects by being inefficient in how you're moving people around. So Odyssey uses AI in real time as you're making those changes to the schedule. It quantifies the trade-off. This will result in X revenue. This will, stress the schedule in such a way. And so that's the sustainability benefit. You can get hyper efficient with how you're deploying your assets.
So this is very interesting. You've invested in software that helps with operational efficiency. You've invested in future airframe, Jet Zero blended wing. You've also invested in 12, the e-fuel maker in Washington State, isn't it?
That's right. And Air Company.
An air company. Tell
Yes.
me about why you're investing in SAF and why you two SAF companies, not just one.
Yes. So again, going back to the five-part path, clearly SAF is our biggest unlock to decarbonizing aviation, and it works with all the existing airplanes. So that is the big lever that we need to move. But airlines are limited in what they can do. As you know, scaling SAF, truly scaling SAF, is a monumental and multi-party effort that's going to play out over time. So going back through the lens that I look at it through my venture investment, what can I do against that sector of our five-part path? And so PTL sort of rose to prominence saying, of all the different ways to make SAF, this is the one that's in its earliest stage of technology where we have the most to learn about it. Which way is it headed? It's also the one that has the most potential upside. Theoretically, you could have this limitless supply of fuel made from just air and water. It's like magic if it works out. So, in this sense, we have a lot to learn about it. And from a venture perspective, you can also, acquire a reasonable amount of equity with a given investment in something that's so early stage. And so really the investment in those two companies is to get a peek around the corner to see where is this really exciting and promising technology headed and how quickly is it developing. So again, SAF, it's an area we have limited investment in because it's not ideally suited to venture capital. But having said that, at the moment, we're cooking up a very interesting thing in SAF that I'm not ready to share yet, but stay tuned.
I'm curious, you just made a statement. SAF is not traditionally suited to venture capital. Why do you say so?
Well, I mean, venture capital typically has a shorter return horizon. I can't be telling my investment committee that we're going to make this investment and we're going to see something in decades and decades from now, or to scale SAF to a meaningful number. It just takes project level finance. You're talking about a scale of dollars that is not at all in line with any CVC, much less an airline CVC. But when you're looking at PTL, it goes back to we understand how HEFA is made. There's no mystery about that. It's how do you scale this to the vast quantities that you're going to need to power the global airline industry? Again, venture dollars are small dollars relative to that scale. They're not meaningful or helpful. But to the extent that they buy you a seat at the table where PTL is being developed, and you can say, oh, this is going to happen, or it's going to happen on timeline X, not Y. That's really what that investment helps us understand.
Very interesting. And why invest in two competitors, 12 and Air Company? Are you just hedging your bets or is there something else?
Right. So 12 is a long-standing relationship for us. We've known those guys from their very earliest days. We really like them. We're working together on an exciting project here in Washington State. And so 12 was an investment to support a company we really believe in. Air Company we were less familiar with, but it was a strong recommendation through Carbon Direct. And Carbon Direct is a fund that we are LPs in of the various we have three fund relationships. You mentioned Up Partners. We are invested in the Wesley Group as well, and Carbon Direct. And of those, Carbon Direct is the one that has a team of scientists as their board that's picking the stocks that have PhDs in things like SAF. And so when we got a call from them saying, "Hey, this is a company that you really should pay attention to. We think their technology is very compelling." It was sort of, well, this is the reason we invested as an LP is to get this sort of insight. And so it was a SPV, or special purpose vehicle, through that fund. But 12, we were more familiar with.
Got it. Got it. That does make sense. Now, we've looked at shorter term investments like Odyssey and Jet Zero, I would say still medium term, to longer term like Power to Liquid, ESAF. How do you balance between long-term investments versus short-term impact in your approach? I mean, I think the number is 175 billion is what's needed in annual investments till 2050 for aviation to reach net zero. How do you decide?
Yes. So earlier in my career, I was a consultant at McKinsey, and there I learned about, and I would use with clients, something we called the Three Horizons Framework. It's a strategic tool that you can use to manage innovation growth across different time horizons. And it's something that I've found very helpful and relevant to the way I think about investing on behalf of Alaska Airlines' sustainability interests. It's exactly what you're talking about. A framework like that helps you balance short-term goals with your longer-term objectives. So I'll just describe it to you. So Horizon 1, it's a 3-horizon framework. Horizon 1 you can think of as your core business improvements, things that can happen from right now, today, to maybe a year or two out. And for us in this first horizon, we're focusing on incremental improvements to existing operations. Things like, how do we become more fuel efficient? Fleet renewal would fit into that. Swapping out as many 737 NGs for MAXs, optimizing the routing to get lower fuel consumption, things like that. These kind of initiatives, they typically have short-term payoff, and also it's important, they tend to be aligned with existing regulatory requirements. We don't have to wait for any changes in regs or anything to do them. So Horizon 2 are the emerging opportunities. Those are, you can call them maybe 2 to 5 years out. And here we're thinking about investment in things that show potential, but maybe aren't fully mainstream. So I would put SAF, carbon offset, hybrid electric aircraft in this category. So focus on investing here is to accelerate. Let's get them to scale up faster and help them prepare for more broad implementation that could be kind of a medium-term benefit for us in sustainability. And then you have Horizon 3, which I think of as our long-term vision. And that's where we focused on transformational technology, which is 5+ years out. It could be 20 years out. And so for us in airline sustainability, that would include investing in zero-emission aircraft or entirely new propulsion tech. That's not going to happen in 5 years, but it needs to be on the path. And so these are investments you can consider somewhat high risk, but if they're successful, they could have dramatic long-term environmental and economic returns. The key thing that I think is often misunderstood with these 3 horizons is that these horizons are not to be thought of as sequential, meaning you don't do Horizon 1 today, then 2 tomorrow, and 3. You have to make investments in all 3 horizons simultaneously, but understand that they're going to mature and pay off at different times. And so you scale your level of exposure accordingly. So anyway, that framework is really helpful to me to balance that.
Wow, thank you. Very insightful. I wasn't familiar with this framework, but it does make sense in the work that you're doing. Your role involves both evaluating emerging technologies, long-term horizon, like we spoke about, and also working closely with Alaska Airlines operational teams to make sure that they're realistic. How do you ensure that the technologies you're investing in can actually be practically implemented? Perhaps you can talk to me both through the Alaska Airlines lens as well as this customer advisory board you talked about. That was very intriguing.
Yeah, it's a really important question that you bring up. If it's not going to be operationalized, then it's really not useful. And so in our investment model, what we're trying to do is to learn as much as anything else. And so it's essential that we invest something that we can actually implement and not have it be a science project. And so one of the things that we've done is to involve operational teams as early as possible, even from their initial due diligence. If I get an idea, I'll call a colleague on an operational area and say, hey, what do you think about this? Have you heard about this? Does this make any sense? Could you see a world in which your teams would use this? And so if we get a strong reaction from operational people and SMEs, leaders on that side, that something we're pursuing could never be practical or supported, we won't go after it. It's as simple as that. So let me think of a positive example. So Asaya, are you familiar with Asaya?
No, I'm not. Enlighten me, please.
Super exciting company. It's a startup company that is using computer vision and machine learning to optimize turnaround processes at the gate. And so here's an example where it's you might not think of that as sustainability, but that APU is burning half a gallon to a gallon of jet fuel a minute on the ground times over 1,000 flights a day. So there's a meaningful amount of fuel burn unnecessarily. If you can reduce turn times, you get a benefit there. And so what Asaya does is it takes all these processes. There are about 80 steps that have to happen between an airplane parking at a gate, unloading, and then reloading and pushing back as the next flight number, getting the people off, straightening the seatbelts, topping off the fuel, catering, all these things. There's about 80 steps. And today it's very manual process that happens against a timeline to the next departure. Asaya leverages the fact that there are cameras at every airport pointing out onto the tarmac. And if you train these cameras, say, hey, that's a catering truck. It should have shown up 20 minutes before departure. It showed up 10 minutes. Now there's going to be a delay. It can flag that and escalate it to make sure that that delay doesn't happen, to prevent it. And I can tell you as an airline pilot how many times I've been sitting in the cockpit of the plane, ready to go, 2 minutes from shutting the door, and I'll get a tap on my shoulder and I turn around and it's the flight attendant, and he or she will tell me, hey, I never got my coffee topped off. And I'm thinking, first of all, well, why are you just telling me this now? but the point is, by the time I call it in on the radio, we're going to take a half an hour delay. That could have been prevented by a computer vision model looking and saying that coffee, never was delivered, and when it should have been, because everything has a timestamp. So anyway, that's Asaya, super exciting company that's driving a lot of step change efficiency and turnarounds and sustainability on the ground. But it's an example of an early stage startup where we invested because of the operational teams telling us how great it was. We became customers first, and then we heard, wow, this thing has so much potential on the sustainability side. We invested to just make sure we live on time. That's one of the metrics, as you know, the DOT tracks us on, is on-time performance, and this is a way to help it. So that was exactly what you're asking about. It was such a link to operations that it was operation team saying, this is a really good technology, and now we invested in the Series A. So that link to operationalizing what we're actually seeing out there and investing in is just critical, and it's always going to be core to how we run this investment arm for the airline.
Wow, thank you so much. What a great insight. I love the example there. And I can totally see how a simple piece of software can help with so many operational decisions. You touched upon how you pulled together the customer advisory board for Jet0. Is that something you're able to share a bit more about here?
Yeah, so for the first meeting, there was a lot of customers from all over the world. You had just about every large airline you could think of, including Hawaiian Airlines before it was part of Alaska Air Group. And the last meeting happened last month, and as I mentioned, it was attended by some SMEs on the flight ops side, and my understanding is that the cadence is only going to increase. So Jet0 has been very, very proactive in soliciting feedback from its not just us as an investor, but from as many airlines as possible as they bake the design for this thing.
Got it. Very, very exciting. You also had a unique approach where I think we touched upon this earlier, where you chose to invest in fund partnerships first before making direct investments, which you're doing now. Was this the plan? Have there been certain advantages to this approach?
Very much so. So once we realized that the world around us is changing so rapidly and made a decision that it was time to invest in this emerging sustainability technology, that's when we took a look internally and realized we have a lot to learn about investing. Again, you don't join an airline to do investment banking typically. So we were very fortunate that right off the bat, we had two very strong existing relationships. I already mentioned partners and my personal connection with that group, but the other was the Wesley Group. And they are a venture capital firm based in Palo Alto who've been investing in clean tech and sustainability for over 15 years with a strong track record of success. They've in fact launched 5 funds in the $300 million range. And their founder, Steve Wesley, is a super ultra high integrity person who was one of the first investors in Tesla and a member of its very first board of directors. Very interesting man who was, he was actually the CFO for the state of California under both Democrat and Republican. Yeah, as he liked to say, he worked for an Austrian bodybuilder and a career Democratic politician. So, but Steve and his team have been champions of ours in California for years, and that's a very critical market for us. And so we invested in their group, and that gives us and because they're focused on climate, we get a perspective on what is the future of the grid. So much, as you know, PTL is going to require incredible amounts of green electricity if it's going to be viable. And so the Wesley Group gives us a lot of insight into electrification and the future of energy. And then UP, of course, they're focused on vehicles themselves, the future of moving things, the moving world, as they call it, people, goods, cleaner, safer, more reliably. And so between those two, we sort of got our pulse on the future of clean energy and then transportation vehicles. And that covers a huge amount of what we worry about in our business. And after about a year of working with them, and the Wesley Group was very gracious, they allowed me a secondment. I spent a lot of time, like a fly on the wall. It sort of felt like being on Shark Tank, where I got to see world-class investors really putting entrepreneurs through the grill, and then afterwards, how they evaluated the pitches. And so I finally was able to come back and talk with our CFO and our team and say, I think we can do this on our own. In some sense, it's not rocket science. When you're looking early stage, there's not a lot of diligence to be done. It's an idea, it's a team. There's not a track record, or a lot of customers to go to. But obviously, there are people who are better at it than others. And so for us, that was the reason. Let's learn from the best and gain that capability.
Very nice. I love the approach, right? You're, like you said, airlines don't typically have investment bankers on payroll. So why not learn from the best? Um, of course, everyone knows Alaska Airlines and Hawaiian's merger has been approved. You will be getting long haul wide body aircraft, flying them out of Seattle. For all of these aircraft, in the short to medium term, you need sustainable aviation fuel. What role do you see ASP playing in scaling up of SAF production and adoption beyond the investments in 12 and air company we've spoken about?
So this alludes to something I mentioned earlier. We're working on a project internally right now that I'm not at liberty to yet share, but check back with me in about 6 months.
This episode will definitely be out by then, so we will check back and hopefully report on it on simplifying and sustainability in the air channels. Beyond sustainability, what other strategic benefits have you seen from having a dedicated CVC? Has it positioned Alaska Airlines in the broader aviation ecosystem in a better manner?
I think so, for sure. As I mentioned at the beginning of our chat here, Alaska Airlines has really always been a leader in technology and innovation, going back to the very earliest days. It might have something to do with just how tough the environment. You think about a guy with a single airplane in 1926 in the state of Alaska, how tough it was. It just makes you have to rely on being scrappy and innovative. It also might have to do with the fact that we're the only airline that's headquartered on the West Coast, where so much of this innovation is actually occurring. But it's something that's in our DNA.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really deeply within the DNA of the airline. Is we must innovate. We must do the next new thing. I mentioned something earlier about how we used GPS. This is a really, really big deal. The story I'll tell you real quickly has to do with the fact that Juneau, Alaska, is the only U.S. state capital that's inaccessible by road. You can either fly in there or take a boat. And half the year when the ice is frozen, you can only fly in there. And many days when the visibility is poor, you just can't get there at all. And so it reached a point about 30 years ago where the state legislature was missing so many meetings that there was a motion to move the capital to Anchorage. This coincided with the development of GPS. The U.S. Department of Defense launched the GPS constellation, and we had a very brilliant pilot at the time. He's still with us, Steve Fulton, Captain Steve Fulton, aeronautical engineer, said, I bet we could use GPS to guide airplanes. This is at a time when every airplane in the world was using ground-based radio navigation, which is far more dangerous, especially in mountainous places, because signals get obscured by obstructions and whatnot. And so this man built a team that eventually turned into GE Aviation. The company ended up being sold to GE Aviation, but it was an Alaska Airlines project that created GPS air navigation.
Wow.
Ultimately became the de facto standard. Every airline in the world navigates this way. And so you talk about strategic benefits of investment. We should have invested in his company. Imagine if we had invested 30 years ago. But now we're taking a concerted effort to recognize that things are changing again, and that we can take equity positions in some of this change and control our destiny. And so I think it just further cements our leadership role in innovation, and it just makes sure that we stay relevant and plugged into these breakthroughs. Maybe if they're not going to be on the scale of the GPS, revolution that happened, but
wow,
we're ready.
Fantastic. This is so exciting. As you look towards 2030, what technology developments in sustainable aviation most excite you, and where do you see the biggest opportunities for impact?
Okay, so I'm going to show my bias here. So I think of myself first and foremost as a pilot. I've been flying airplanes for 37 years, 30 of those professionally. I learned to fly in high school. I soloed on my 16th birthday. My mother had to drive me to the airport because I didn't have a driver's license yet. And that's really my identity. And so for me, it's somewhat sad to observe that when I was a kid, you could fly from New York to London in 4 hours, and now it takes 6. It would have been reasonable to think that when the Concorde first came onto the scene, that by now we'd be practically teleporting ourselves from place to place. But the reality of aircraft development has really been the opposite. Believe it or not, the Boeing 737 that I fly at Alaska Airlines was originally developed in 1966. And that makes it closer in time to the Wright brothers' first flight in 1903 than to today. It also means that when you think about its newest incarnation, the 737 MAX, it's an amazing airplane, by the way, and it's fantastic. It's a joy to fly. It's incredible the efficiency that engineers have wrung out of that design. But at the heart, there's nothing extraordinarily new or novel about it, or Airbus, or any of these designs. I'm not picking on any OEM. These concepts haven't changed much since the 60s. The efficiency come from the airframe and the engines. That's amazing, but the fundamental design hasn't changed. And that's why, for me, I'm most excited about Jet Zero. The fact that we're radically rethinking the shape of a commercial airplane for the first time. It's long overdue, and I just hope I get to fly it.
This is amazing. You've mentioned, of course, every time when we connected, I know about your piloting history. What gives you a unique insight when you're making these investments, given that you're a pilot?
I actually think it helps a lot, and in probably ways I don't even fully understand myself. So when I had the idea to pitch a venture fund or venture arm to the senior leaders of the airline, I was really inspired by Bonnie Simi, who you know from JetBlue pioneered this.
JetBlue Ventures to now Joby.
Exactly. An amazing person, airline pilot at JetBlue. So I thought, wow, it hasn't been done before. And so she was really the pathfinder for me, that someone had done this before and shown that there is value to someone who has that operational experience. And I really think that's how it helps. There is no substitute in life for having done something, for having walked in certain shoes, whether it's even something to say, hey, I've been a dues paying member of the Airline Pilots Association for 20 plus years. And I know what it feels like to be a member of a pilot union and the concerns that we have and what is important to the people who will operate these things. If you don't have that perspective, you could be overly excited about technology that may have no hope to ever be approved and implemented. And that's a big miss. And so I think that's just one example of how having been so deeply connected to the flying experience helps me evaluate things.
I love it. Pasha, this has been so inspiring to hear a practitioner, a pilot, coming in and taking a corporate venture capital role. I surely do hope to see so many exciting things that Alaska Airlines and Alaska Star Ventures has been working on come to fruition. Now, the final part of this interview is my favorite part, which is the rapid fire round, in which we get to know you a bit more personally. Okay. And we'll start with something simple, like what's your favorite book?
Favorite book? Okay, well, I was a philosophy major in college, so I've read an awful lot of books, but too many to have a favorite, but one of them would have to be René Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. I know it sounds like a real page-turner, but give it a chance. I also have a copy of Jack London's People of the Abyss, always on my bedside table, but that's a story for another time.
Wow. Okay, I need to get deeper into the People of Abyss.
It's not uplifting. I'm just letting you know.
That's okay. I've gone through quite a bit of morose stuff myself this year. Since you work with an airline, I won't trouble you with that question. But what's your favorite airport?
Favorite airport? Wow. Okay, I wasn't ready for that one.
Mm-hmm.
You got me on this one. Favorite airport? Well, I would have to say, as a passenger, I have two different answers. As a pilot or as a passenger? As a passenger, definitely Changi. No doubt about it. I spent 4 years.
Both are former home? Yeah.
Former home, Singapore Changi. I don't think anyone can touch Changi. I mean, what other airport do you know of where people actually go there as a side day trip?
Just to hang out. Yeah, just to hang out. Yeah.
That says it all. And favorite airport to fly into is DCA. There's something about threading the needle down the Potomac River that every time I do it, I still think, how is this legal?
Yeah, they have this new route, right over the river.
It's an incredibly exciting thing to do.
Very interesting. Good one. Your favorite aircraft, how about that?
Favorite aircraft is, without doubt, the F-86 Sabre jet. It was the first swept-wing fighter jet during the Korean War era, and it's one of these things where, there's a sort of a principle in engineering where if it looks good, it ought to fly good. And if you look at this thing, you can just imagine how fast it went. And unfortunately, unlikely to ever fly one, but I have many models of them at home.
Interesting. Your favorite city?
Ooh, okay. So I'm not much of a city person. I'm actually perfectly happy living on an island in the Pacific Northwest like I do, but I've always been an Anglophile, so I'll have to say London.
Okay, good one. Favorite movie?
The Right Stuff. Definitely. My earliest childhood dream was to have been an Apollo astronaut, but I was born in 1972, which was the year of the last Apollo landing. Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt. It was Apollo 17. So I missed that boat the year I was born.
Wow. Okay. Well, Artemis is coming, so there might be a chance there. What do you do in your free time, Pasha?
Well, I have 2 daughters and a wife, and I spend as much time with my family as I can. But I managed to restore and build classic cars and racing cars with my daughters, actually. So,
Whoa. Okay, I didn't see that coming. How many of these do you have?
no more than 2 at a given time for family harmony.
Okay. What is something you'd like to learn?
Something to learn. Well, I'd like to be a better musician. You know, I specifically I'd like to learn how to improvise in music. I grew up studying classical piano, and then I picked up guitar, rock guitar in high school. I play constantly, but there's no limit to how much you can learn in music. So I think I would like to keep learning music as long as I live.
Love it. The best advice you've received.
Ooh, the best advice. Okay. So, this isn't overt advice per se, but when I was a teenager, I had an incredible opportunity to spend time with General Jimmy Doolittle, who he was a legend in aviation by any measurement. He was the person who invented the instruments for flying, the first PhD in aeronautical engineering from MIT, and led the raid over Tokyo, which was the U.S. response to Pearl Harbor attack. And he was in his 90s, and I was 16, and we spent an hour together. And what I learned from that, reflecting back, is that there is no better way to learn something than by doing it. And there's no better teacher in life than doing hard things. And so I always try to keep that in the forefront of my mind.
Love it. Final question. If we are speaking 1 year from today and we are popping champagne, what are we celebrating?
1 year from now, we'll be celebrating this very exciting idea that I was telling you about earlier. And
now you've really built it up. I can't wait.
And if it doesn't come to fruition, we'll just be celebrating our friendship, because you're right, we have a lot in common, and I look forward to staying connected with all the important work you're doing at Simplifying.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Pasha, for such a lively and enlightening interview. I really appreciate your insights.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp. Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@simplifying, that's simply with an i.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simplifying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by Simplifying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pau is our Supervising Editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Mira Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Ligia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimen is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.